Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we are going to be talking about the movie Drive on Blu-ray. So if you're looking at the cover art, you can probably guess that this is not the Ryan Gosling movie of the same name, but make no mistake, this Drive is a very unique experience in its own right. And it was directed by a gentleman named Steve Wang, who is arguably better known for his makeup and special effects work than for his directorial output. And it was written by Scott Phillips. So the story of Drive begins with a man named Toby, who is the unwilling recipient of a bioenergy module, which is more or less implanted where his heart is. And this module allows for the wearer to be in something of a permanent state of an adrenaline high. And it also grants them enhanced reflexes and durability in combat. But Toby was someone who did not want to be a participant in this experiment, nor did he want to be the recipient of this device. But because he got involved in some shady situations, he was the unwilling guinea pig for this experiment. But he's able to break away from his captors, who are based in Hong Kong, and he's able to make his way to San Francisco, where he is pursued by American mercenaries as well as Chinese mercenaries who are intending to get him back to his handlers in Hong Kong, the ones that he's trying to get away from. And so as he's on the run from a whole army of mercenaries, he comes across a man named Malik, who is a bit down on his luck. He's in the process of getting a divorce from his wife. Unfortunately, what was once a happy marriage, with also a loving daughter, is on the rocks. And so he's sort of holed up at a bar, trying to make a living, writing songs, but that's not panning out so well. And so on this particular day, Toby happens to crash into this very same bar that Malik is in. And unfortunately, the army of mercenaries is on Toby's tail. And so a bunch of mayhem ensues. And in kind of improvised desperation, Toby grabs Malik and takes him hostage, and puts him in a position where he has to drive them from one point to another. And namely, Toby's trying to make it to Los Angeles, where hopefully he'll be able to get into contact with forces and parties from, say, the American side of the government, who are willing and able to take the module out of him and use it. And even though they're wanting to use it for their own devices, but they guarantee that they can dismantle it to where they can get it out of him safely, as well as prevent him from being tracked by his handlers in Hong Kong. And so it's in this mission, or it's in this quest to get to Los Angeles, that Malik put in a position of being the unwilling hostage as well as driver for Toby. He begins to develop a bit of a friendship with Toby, partially because they're initially chained together by way of handcuffs, but once they get the handcuffs off, there's a bit more agency of an individual freedom for both of them. But they are having to work together because the army of mercenaries is still on their tail. And so you also have the the fact that while Toby is definitely, the one who is more skilled and competent when it comes to, say, straight up combat, Malik has a better way of, say, interacting with people and getting people to, say, either stand down and let them pass, or he's able to get himself and Toby to blend in, when they're amongst other people. And so it's a very unique partnership slash chase scene, or one long chase scene, I guess you could call it. But I mean, that's the main story of the movie. But I actually had a lot of fun with this, and it's a movie I'd been wanting to see for a bit, mainly because I'm a bit of a fan of the actor slash martial artist Mark Dacascos, who was in movies such as Brotherhood of the Wolf, and Crying Freeman, and a whole bunch of other movies and within the B genre. But having mentioned Brotherhood of the Wolf and Crying Freeman, he definitely has had a few hits when it comes to, say, mainstream films as well. And he was also in the third John Wick movie, which I still need to see. But anyway, though, I've always been a fan of Mark Dacascos ever since seeing him in Brotherhood of the Wolf, and I've always liked the work I've seen him do. He kind of is like someone who is, say, I mean, he's never going to be someone who wins an Academy Award for Best Acting or anything like that, but he's definitely more charismatic than, say, someone like Steven Seagal, or, and I hate to say it, but I would even say he's more charismatic than Chuck Norris. Please don't kill me, Chuck. But I would say that, he's more along the lines of someone like Jackie Chan, who, I mean, is definitely, a badass when it comes to fighting and what have you, but at the same time, he's he's always able to play, someone who has some graciousness to them, and some charm, to where, you are pulling for them, every step of the way. But anyway, yeah, I'd heard about this movie and I'd been wanting to see it, but it was originally released straight to home video when it came out in 1997. And as far as, say, DVD and Blu-ray, I don't know for sure if it was ever available, stateside on DVD, but this is, I believe, the first time it's been put out on Blu-ray stateside. And, the film company, MVD Rewind Collection, they've been making a pretty good career of taking what are arguably cult movies and, that maybe weren't seen by a wide audience, and re-releasing them, on, say, DVD and most predominantly Blu-ray, with several special features, to where maybe the few people who actually saw these movies when they initially came out, they can actually, sort of rediscover them and watch the movie with a bit of a spruced up presentation. And so I'm very glad that, one, Drive got this treatment finally, and also I'm glad to have, finally been able to see it, because it was a fun movie. And, Mark Dacascos does not disappoint in this movie. He does a good job as far as acting goes, and he kicks ass when it comes to the action scenes. As I was saying about him, he definitely has a Jackie Chan sensibility to him, in terms of, his, charisma and his fighting styles. And also, I really liked, the character of Malik as played by Kadeem Hardison, and I've seen him in a few other movies, but this was, I think, the first time I'd seen him in a lead role, And I really enjoyed seeing him at work because he's predominantly there in the sense of being, say, a comedic foil to the more straight-laced Toby, but at the same time, though, there's a lot of humanity that this character has, to where, as crazy as the situation is that he finds himself in with Toby, he really does a good job of playing, say, just an ordinary guy who, I mean, he's trying to keep, he's trying to put his life back together, or at the very least, start over. But nonetheless, I mean, he's also trying to literally survive in a situation that he has little control over. But at the same time, he's trying to help someone who's clearly socially awkward. In this case, Toby. Sort of, I guess you could say, be a more human individual, as it were. And Toby, ironically, begins to try and, help Malik out as well, in the sense of, he tries to, give him straight up advice as far as, how to, patch things up with his wife, or his estranged wife, as it were. And so, their nature's sort of, it's an interesting clash of personalities, but at the same time, the two of them, they go from the sort of captor and captive to mutual friends in a very strange way. And Mark Dacascos, I was going to say real quick, he does what I think is some of his best work, in the sense of he's able to, carry the movie along with Kadeem Hardison, because he has, say, a very intense approach when it comes to the action scenes, but at the same time, when things are, say, calmed down, or when he's bonding with Malik, or just, say, taking a moment to stop and smell the roses, or, case in point, when he and Kadeem end up at a karaoke bar later on in the movie, and you see Toby just, relaxed and actually having a good time. He's a very, he makes Toby into a very likable, character, as well as a badass. And, Kadeem Hardison, as Malik as well, as I said, was very likable. And so, as far as the protagonists go, you're with two characters who are, well developed and entertaining to watch on screen, albeit in different ways. One of the things I liked about, say, both characters and their action scenes is that, Toby, as played by Mark Dacascos, is definitely the more, I guess you could say, dangerous when it comes to all-out fighting, because he's a trained fighter, or his both as, say, an actor as well as his character, whereas Malik, as played by Kadeem Hardison, his handling of action scenes tends to be more improvised, as in, he is not a fighter, but he's capable of, say, using whatever's within arm's reach as a weapon. And there's a really cool scene where he actually uses a chainsaw on a henchman, and not to the point of, say, Dennis Hopper fighting Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but more like there's a henchman looking for him, and he's hidden on the ground behind a cabinet, and there's a chainsaw, because they're actually in a tool shed in a garage, and there's a chainsaw there, a small one, but he gets a chainsaw and he gets it going long enough to where he's able to cut one of the henchman's hands off, and namely it's the gun hand, and you see the gun hand go flying, literally, and actually manages to take out its own owner. And so when it comes to, say, improvisation, the character of Malik, he's really handy with stuff like that, as it turns out, and he actually gets better with it throughout the movie. So I thought that the depiction of fighting styles for both characters was very fun to watch as well. And also, anytime there's like an army of mercenaries coming after them, I mean, whether it be, say, a straight up shootout or just a full on physical beatdown, I mean, the action scenes are really fun to watch. Like, there's a lot of energy to them. There's a lot of seemingly impossible acrobatics, and yeah, I mean, there was some wire work, but for the most part, though, it really seems like they really just went all out on making things as grounded and as physically possible when it comes to, say, martial arts. And I also liked how while there's a minor sci-fi element in a sense of this implant, this module enhancing its owner, at the same time, it doesn't detract from the fact that this movie is seemingly set in ordinary, America, but also the fact that there's all these unique denizens that Toby and Malik come across. It at times kind of makes the movie feel like that there were scenes that were guest directed by someone like David Lynch, namely with the character of Deliverance, as played by the late Brittany Murphy. And she even looks like one of the characters that was on the show Twin Peaks. Sherilyn, who was played by Sherilyn Fenn, brunette. But you look at her, you look at both characters, you look at Sherilyn Finn's character from Twin Peaks, and then you look at Brittany Murphy's character here, there's definitely a similarity in terms of how they both look to each other, but also in terms of, the seemingly, ditzy natures of their characters as well. So I can't be 100% sure, but someone involved with the movie had to have been a fan of Twin Peaks in order to basically channel that level of strangeness for a character. And I really liked her character as well, because, I mean, she's someone who is off the wall crazy. They find her when they're needing to pull over and rest for a bit because Toby is overexerted his energy stores, and to a point of he literally has to sleep, in order to recharge for a few hours. But Malik ends up, catching her Deliverance's affections, and she sort of becomes a bit of an abhorrent admirer in some ways. But at the same time, Malik becomes fond of her as well, simply because of how, I guess you could say, innocent she is in some ways, but at the same time, there's a bit of a naughty side to her. And so and I liked how there was even a moment or two, like when in one of the action scenes, it's like there's a moment that channels like old school film romance, wherein like there was this huge explosion within the garage that they're fighting in, and Malik gets her out of the way, and it's one of those, it just happens to result in one of those old school romantic poses where the guy has the woman like this and she's looking up at him, and it's kind of my hero type moment, and they play that sort of swelling da 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 type music. And so that it definitely you get some good comedic results from their interactions with one another. But also I just loved seeing her in the fight scenes, because I mean, for the most part she's kind of just keeping her head down here and there, but she also picks up a gun and just starts firing like crazy, and you can tell she's enjoying it. And it gets to a point where even a couple of reviewers who have taken a shot at covering the movie have said that Brittany Murphy elevates this movie to a whole new level whenever she's in it, just based on how crazy she plays her character. And so for the time, the three of them make for a good little trio together, of very different personalities. And I like the fact that there are other times where she also seemed to be channeling Melissa Tomei's character from My Cousin Vinny, in the sense that she's loopy, but she's also an expert when it comes to, say, car mechanic items and things like that. And so so it was really interesting whenever her character came up, because on one hand it was like there was a David Lynch vibe in terms of how crazy and kooky she was, but also there was the whole My Cousin Vinny vibe with her as well, in the sense of just how she just happened to be good with cars too. And so I was disappointed that she wasn't in the movie more than she was. But at the same time, for the time Brittany Murphy was in the movie, she was very entertaining to watch, and it definitely made for a good group dynamic with the three of them. And the bad guys in this movie are something else entirely. There's like, I'm not going to say it's like Frank Miller or Quentin Tarantino level of dialogue when it comes to, say, film noir or anything like that, but at the same time it's almost like a pastiche of crime drama and film noir dialogue, because you have two of the henchmen. There was I think his name was Vic, and Hedgehog. That's actually a name. The two of them have a very interesting dynamic, because Hedgehog's the kind of guy who he's in charge of, like, the tech and some of the tech and weapons that the mercenaries have, and Vic is the sort of like the gunslinger leader of the of certain parts of this mercenary group. And it was very odd, but strangely entertaining as well whenever you saw the two of them interacting with one another, in a sense of some of the stuff that they talked about. And one of the things that I guess doesn't just apply to their characters, but also applies to just about everyone else, is there's a bit that it's like some sort of a sitcom or soap opera where there's this frog who is a world-class doctor somehow. I mean, it's literally just a frog, but everyone on the show is basically clueless without this frog. I mean, it's a frog who's a doctor, and watching that show, I mean, everyone in the movie seems to be a huge fan of the show, and it kind of made me think of that I'd buy that for $1 guy from RoboCop or something like that. And so I like that bit of social satire, in the sense that there's a show that's so ridiculous that somehow everyone's watching. And so it's like there's all these different things going on here. I mean, you've got your straight up action film, and you've got your buddy drama / comedy, and then you have your sort of weird independent film vibe with the scenes with Brittany Murphy, and then then you have sort of Tarantino or Frank Miller light when it comes to, say, the main bad guys and their dialogue with each other. But yeah, the character of Vic, though, is straight up cuckoo and almost obsessed with, say, the characters of Toby and Malik, and just based on how often they're able to escape him. But there was an element that I think could have stood to use a bit of polishing, and that's the fact that the organization in Hong Kong has, say, it's implied that they have a prototype army of similarly enhanced soldiers to Toby, and in fact, Toby ends up fighting one of these soldiers at the climax of the movie. And on one hand, I did like the fact that the head of this organization was played by James Shigeta, who was a really good actor who was in a lot of martial arts or action films, as well as the character of the advanced model that Toby ends up fighting. He was played by Masaya Kato, I think is how you say his name, and he'd been in a lot of action films on the Asian side of things as well. And so seeing these two guys, in the same movie, along with Mark Dacascos, was a very neat little sight for the eyes of the action enthusiast. But I liked what I saw of, the main bad guys. I think his name was Mr. Lau. He was the one who was in charge of the handlers in Hong Kong who are trying to get a hold of Toby. I like the glimpse of that mysterious technological world that they had, but at the same time, I feel like it was kind of glossed over, and there was even a bit of a cliffhanger in one of the scenes towards the end of the movie that it goes from being an implication that there's a whole army of these people on standby to a straight up confirmation. And so, there's a part of me that was kind of wondering, well, why didn't they just send a whole army of these guys after Toby? I mean, there is an explanation in the sense that, Toby's bio module was by this point in the film obsolete, simply because of the fact that the branch in Hong Kong had been able to make a series of upgrades to the module, to where, say, the advanced model that they end up sending after Toby has a lot more combat capabilities than Toby did. And so, I mean, there is an explanation in that sense, but at the same time, if this module was already upgraded for widespread use, why then did you just send like a whole army of these guys after Toby and Malik? But that being said, there's not a whole lot of focus on them to the point where there's more of a focus on Toby and Malik's journey. And so, it's one of those things where, the issue is there, but at the same time, it doesn't detract from the movie too much, simply because, the rest of the movie is done well enough to where you're willing to, say, just go along with the ride. But yeah, I really enjoyed the movie. It was really fun. It was entertaining. It also had a really good soundtrack, and the soundtrack for this version, this director's cut, it was by a guy named David Williams, and apparently the soundtrack for the movie when it was originally released was done by someone else, and it was entirely in techno, supposedly. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I'd read, that's what I've heard. Whereas the soundtrack by David Williams and the director's cut here, it's more, there are techno elements to it, but he also has kind of a otherworldly feel at times. And the people who put the soundtrack together, they also have some pretty good 90s tunes, as mainly hip-hop. And so, I'm not a huge hip-hop fan, but I do tend to be fond of hip-hop music that came out of the 90s. And so it was pretty cool hearing some stuff. And there's even a nice little scene where you see, this is at the point where Malik and Toby had actually become friends, but you see them in the car that's taking quite a few hits throughout the movie, So classic car lovers beware. But they're in this classic car that's been beat up and shot up, but they're driving along the roads to get to Los Angeles, and there's this song that's playing, and I forgot what the name of the song was, but you see the two of them sort of just rocking back and forth as they're riding in the car, and just kind of singing along with the music, and Malik sort of helping Toby along until Toby, he gets, the feel for, singing the words and what have you. And so I was like, hey, that was pretty cool. And another thing about this movie is that, you watch this movie and then you watch, say, like the first Rush Hour with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. And there's definitely a similarity there. And it's apparently that wasn't just a coincidence, because in some of the making of features on here, some of the people involved with this movie had actually commented on the fact that I think it might have been the writer, unless I'm mistaken, was kind of buddies with Brett Ratner, the guy who ended up directing the first Rush Hour movie, and so apparently the two of them, they kind of talk back and forth about some of their film ideas, and so when Drive, when it came out, unfortunately it didn't have a widespread audience because it was released direct to home video. But at the same time, when Brett Ratner had Rush Hour out in theaters, he was actually sitting with one of the people that was involved with Drive, and at one point during the movie, leaned over to him and said, something to the effect of, "Hey, if Drive had come out before Rush Hour and it had been in the theater, which it had, but if Drive had come out and it had been in theaters like Rush Hour had, then he said that Drive would have blown Rush Hour out the door, probably, just in terms of how insane it was with its action and what have you." And so kind of straight from the horse's mouth, Brett Ratner did get some inspiration for Rush Hour from this movie, Drive. And so at the same time, though, it's I liked how it's one of those things where, there's similarities between the two, but Drive is definitely a beast on its own in terms of the action scenes and what have you, and the dynamic between the characters. There's similarities and what have you, in that sense that it's initially a reluctant partnership, but at the same time, the fact that they're the types of individuals that they are in this movie, as opposed to, say, the types of characters that were portrayed in, say, Rush Hour. There's similarities, but there's also enough differences to where Drive, as I said, manages to stand out as a beast on its own. But yeah, it was a really cool movie. Insane action scenes, some good comedy, and also some good bits of character development here and there. Nothing to be say award winning, but at the same time enough to where as crazy as the action scenes were, you didn't forget that there were some very human characters involved, and even when Brittany Murphy's character comes up, humans tend to be strange sometimes, and so her weirdness, while it was weird, it didn't say alienate the audience, or at least it didn't alienate me. It was more like, yeah, I've met some strange people kind of like that, maybe not quite to the degree that she's in, and definitely not in the same situation, but at the same time, it's not like, say, unbelievably strange, if that makes sense. And so you have some unique characters that you tend to kind of pull for. Although I will say that the main villains, Vic and Hedgehog, as entertaining as they are, I do feel like that they sort of mar the line between, say, insane comic book type movie and grounded in reality action movie in some ways, because there are times where they're both very over the top, but at the same time, I mean, they stand out and they're unique enough to where you don't really see characters exactly like them in other movies, although there are some similarities. But also, especially with the character of Vic, I mean, he does such a good job of making you hate him to where, anytime he gets his comeuppance, I mean, it's sort of like, yes! But the final fight, though, between Toby and the advanced model, between Mark Dacascos and Masaya, it was a really cool fight scene, and it was one of the few fight scenes where the character of Toby was kind of in trouble. And I feel like they did a good job with that, in the sense that, I mean, they had established that while, yeah, Toby had his limitations, in the sense that because of his permanent, adrenaline high, he had to, have, power naps, from time to time. The fact that the advanced model literally felt like an advanced model going up against something obsolete, to a point where Malik had to help him out, to an extent. And I liked that the final fight, really kind of had you on the edge of your seat, both in terms of how intense it was, in terms of, like the action and fight choreography, but also the fact that, Toby actually gets his butt kicked to some extent. But yeah, I do wish that there were certain elements of the movie that I wish had been maybe developed a little bit more. But at the same time, what we got, though, I think it worked for the movie as well as it could have, especially with this director's cut here. I haven't watched the original theatrical cut, which is available on the Blu-ray, mainly because the theatrical cut, it's more grainy and I guess degraded in terms of film quality and what have you. But at the same time, the director's cut, though, it's very polished, very spruced up. The people over at MVD did a really good job of cleaning up the movie, and I'm glad that if the thoughts on the original music score or anything to go by, I'm glad that they went for the music score by David Williams, for the director's cut here, because they did a really good job with that. But you get a pretty good set of special features. You have an audio commentary by director Steve Wang, as well as the fight choreographer Koichi Sakamoto. I hope I'm saying his name right, but he was the guy who basically was a big part of why the fight choreography and the action scenes were as well done and exciting as they were. And also Mark Dacascos and Kadeem Hardison, the actors who played the main characters, they're involved in the commentary as well. I haven't actually listened to the commentary yet, but I've actually heard it's a pretty lively and enjoyable one. I've heard that from other reviews that the guys all get along rather well on the commentary. You also have some old school behind the scenes making of featurettes that I'm guessing had come out around the time that the movie was made, because when you see the interviews, it's definitely when everyone involved was much younger. And there's also a couple of deleted scenes, they're interesting, with the exception of one of them wherein Malik's talking about his daughter to Toby. It would have been nice to see that scene in there, because you do get in the actual movie, you do get to see his wife, who was played by Sanaa Lathan, I think is how you say her name, but she was in the movie's Blade. She was in the original Blade movie with Wesley Snipes, as well as the movie Alien vs. Predator. And so I was like, hey, yeah, I recognize her. So it was really cool to see her there. But at the same time, that that one deleted scene that takes place shortly before she comes on screen, when Malik's talking about his daughter with Toby. It would have been nice if they'd kept that scene in, because I felt like that would have added a little more dimension to the fact that Malik's marriage was on the rocks. But the other deleted scenes, I felt like, I mean, they were interesting, but yeah, the fact that they weren't in the movie isn't really, messing with anything. We also have, several theatrical trailers for this movie as well as others. But yeah, so anyway, it's a good, fun movie with a very nice release on Blu-ray. So if you're looking for a very unique action film that feels like, say, a comic book movie come to life in some ways, albeit without, say, paranormal, a whole lot of paranormal or sci-fi elements, with the exception of the bio energy module and enhanced soldiers. I mean, this is a pretty cool movie. I mean, it's got crazy action scenes, good comedy, and pretty good character development as well, and a good soundtrack. So if you've seen the movie already, but only the stateside theatrical release, definitely check this version out, because the director's cut, it's a lot more clean and polished, and so yeah, whether you're an old school fan of the movie or you've never seen this before, it's definitely worth checking it out on Blu-ray. So I'm going to go ahead and give Drive 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good, fun movie. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And got any questions, comments, please feel free to drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all have a good day. Bye.